Well, I don't hear you.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Now, I'm here too.
This episode of Trifles is brought to you by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, Boscombe Valley was mysterious, Shoscombe Place was old, and the lodge was hysterical, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Was Holmes more of a tea drinker or a coffee fancier? And what are all of the alcoholic drinks mentioned in the stories?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 391, Maps and Floor Plans. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you ready to plan?
I'm ready to plan. I'm ready to map. I'm ready to plan.
Excellent.
I'm ready to thin things out. I'm ready to draw some distances. I've got my protractor, all my things, my string. I need my string and my peg. I got that.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to stand up, actually, sitting here with all of that.
We are going to have some plumb good fun here. Well, let's get the measurements and ordinance out of the way here. We're going to talk about a topic that was suggested by one of our listeners, Ron Groenewoud. Ron, we thank you for this. We'll actually have a little item of our appreciation on its way in the mail to you to thank you for inspiring us. And if you'd like to partake in the same level of appreciation as Ron and have your idea come to light here on the show, just email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com with your suggestion for a show topic. If we do, in fact, select it, we will give you credit on the air and you'll receive a prize. And of course, you can also support us on Patreon and Substack, whichever you choose, either at trifles.substack.com or patreon.com/trifles for as little as $1 a month. And all of our supporters are part of a random drawing at the end of every month. That's this episode. This episode, we will do the drawing where one lucky winner will receive a back issue of the Baker Street Journal, where you can learn more about any of these trifling topics. People have been writing about these for years, so it is our pleasure to just bring them to your earballs. And so, with that in mind, let's get those earballs queued up. Okay, maps and floor plans. So, Ron wrote to us and said, in various stories, floor plans or maps are utilized by our two heroes, and there are even stories that contain a drawing of a floor plan or a map. And of course, Holmes was really into understanding geography of his local environs, so it might be a great topic to consider. Well, Ron, we couldn't agree more.
Yeah, well done, Ron, and many thanks for the topic. And we have, thanks to Ron, I think we have 8 examples, and I think there are more of maps and so on in the cases of Sherlock Holmes. And they exist for a couple of recurring purposes. One is it represents a mystery. People have drawn the relationship of things on pieces of paper, and it's not clear what all that's about. Or it can be a useful tool for Sherlock Holmes in creating his own drawing of particular area. Or it's part of some ongoing investigation where people are trying to determine what exactly happened when. And of course, in other detective novels, particularly in the age of mystery, you would frequently find in Ellery Queen, as an example, and occasionally in Dorothy Sayers, drawings of a particular location that show you how one thing relates to another. And then as time moved on, this became a feature of games like in Britain, Cluedo or Clue in the States, where you would have a mansion with certain rooms and you couldn't figure out who was where and what the alibis were. So it really is a great topic and something we never thought of.
No, indeed. So why don't we turn to the pages of the canon and start out with one of the earliest examples.
Yes.
We don't see this particular map, but we are told about it. And that is a map that is mentioned in the Sign of Four. Recall that Jonathan Small is telling us about his early experience at the fort of Agra and how he fell in with the three Sikhs and was given a map of the fort. Or did he draw a map for them? Was that? I want to make sure I have my facts straight here, but I know there was a map of the fort of Agra that was discussed.
Well, it's the conspirators that that drew the map because it's basically the best of all. It's a treasure map.
Yes.
But we do see it because Mary Morstan shows up with it, doesn't she? Well, maybe.
Let's see.
Oh, no. Here we are. It is in Sign of Four, I think in the second chapter or so. Holmes unfolds the paper carefully and smoothed it out upon his knee. He then very methodically examined it all over with his double lens. It's a paper of native Indian manufacture. It has sometimes been pinned to a board. The diagram upon it appears to be a plan of part of a large building with numerous halls, corridors, and passages. And then he goes on and on and on and explains it and the signatures on it. And she says, he ends that by saying, it's evidently a document of importance. It's been kept carefully in a pocketbook, for the one side is as clean as the other. And she says, it was in my father's pocketbook that we found it.
Indeed. That's exactly what it was. Good reference there. And I guess we find out later on from Jonathan Small himself that he drew the map for Sholto and Morstan. So this is what they kept. Yes.
Yeah. So they each one had a copy theoretically. Yeah. Singh, Sholto, Morstan, and Small.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Very
of course,
good one.
Of course, that's a lovely thing because here you are in this mysterious location, Agra, India, a mysterious disappearance, and what looks for all the world like a treasure map, because there's a mark there. And in fact, there is a great treasure waiting to be found in the story. So
and this is interesting because this would have been 1890 when Conan Doyle wrote this story. Of course, this is from that famous dinner that he had at the Langham Hotel with Lippincott. And Oscar Wilde was also in attendance. And if you recall, Conan Doyle was a native of Scotland. And there is another contemporary of his whom he admired, one Robert Louis Stevenson. And it was only 7 years prior, in 1883, that's one of Stevenson's most famous works, Treasure Island, was written. And, of course, that is, again, the very definition of a buried treasure and a treasure map and whatnot, with X marking the spot.
Stevenson was one of Conan Doyle's classmates at the University of Edinburgh. So, but that's a great example, famous treasure map. And
so, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so that is really fundamental to the story. But there are other maps in the canon that I find it hard to recall because in my memory, the films and the dramatizations of the
yes.
cases have overwritten my knowledge of the text. And so I know there's something going on in The Hound of the Baskervilles, but I don't remember.
Well, Holmes had to pay a visit to a map maker, a local map maker, if I recall, to kind of understand the layout of the moor and whatnot, if I'm recalling correctly.
Oh, well, that sounds familiar. Or he may go out at one point and come back with a map or something.
That could be. Let's see. He had, Watson comes in, and he says, Holmes says, I've been to Devonshire. And Watson says, in spirit? And he said, exactly. My body has remained in this armchair and has, I regret to observe, consumed in my absence 2 large pots of coffee and an incredible amount of tobacco. After you left, I sent down to Stamford's for the ordinance map of this portion of the moor, and my spirit has hovered over it all day. I flatter myself that I could find my way about. A large-scale map, I presume? Oh, very large. He unrolled one section and held it over his knee. Here you have the particular district which concerns us. That's Baskerville Hall in the middle.
Oh, that's lovely. That really is lovely.
Yeah.
And it's so telling. It's such another great characteristic of Sherlock Holmes that he would begin by this kind of research. And I think, as the reader reads that, there's sort of an unspoken thought, gee, that's the sort of thing I would do. If my first question, where is all that? That's really good.
And as long as we are on the novels, let's stick with the final one, The Valley of Fear. Remember that Bertie Douglas was living in fear.
Bertie Edwards.
Bertie Edwards, right.
Douglas.
Jack Douglas, yes. Bertie Edwards was living in fear at Burleston Manor. And, of course, you have this body that's found with its face blown off. And Inspector MacDonald was there. And he said there really wasn't much to identify the man, so little that it was evident that he had carefully guarded himself against identification. There were no papers or letters, and no marking upon the clothes. A cycle map of the county lay upon his bedroom table. He had been he had left the hotel after breakfast yesterday morning on his bicycle, and no more was heard of him until our inquiries. So I guess, if you were a cyclist in those days, you could buy a map specific for your sojourn.
Oh, that's great. Well, and there's a lovely example of a map used as a sort of a red herring by someone to provide a little misdirection about where they actually went.
Yeah. And then it's more toward the end of the story. We are in Pennsylvania. Boss McGinty is on the scene. And he mentions the chief foreman of the Iron Dike Company, a hard citizen, an old color sergeant of the war, all scars and grivels. We've had 2 tries at him, but had no luck, and Jim Carroway lost his life over it. Now, it's for you to take over. That's the house, all alone at the Iron Dike Crossroads, same as you see here on the map, without another within earshot. So that was giving Bertie Edwards the ordinance as to where he needed to make his assassination attempt.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Let's get into the short stories.
Yes, and a good place to start is with the Musgrave Ritual. And, the actual appearance of the map, it's not clear to me where that, or I can't remember where that appears, because early on Holmes has taken out his dispatch box or his storage case, his trunk of records, and he has found, what Watson tells us is a small wooden box with a sliding lid and the children's toys are kept in. And from that he produces a crumpled piece of paper, an old-fashioned brass key, a peg of wood with a ball of string attached to it, and these 3 rusty old discs of metal. And it's the but I don't think that piece of paper is the actual map. Isn't that the ritual?
That was the ritual, right? So recall that when Reginald Musgrave was recounting to Holmes what he discovered in the middle of the night in the library. Brunton was in the library. He was sitting fully dressed in an easy chair with a slip of paper which looked like a map upon his knee, and his forehead sunk forward upon his hand in deep thought. And then later we're told, he took no pains to hide it. He simply wished, I should imagine, to refresh his memory upon that last occasion. He had, as I understand, some sort of map or chart, which he was comparing to the manuscript, which he thrust into his pocket when you appeared.
So Brunton is the one with the map.
Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating. So there's Brunton working out the directions of the ritual on a piece of paper, whereby, except Sherlock Holmes, thinks much better of that and does it on the real terrain.
That's right. That's right, which Brunton evidently did as well before him. But this is the ultimate, buried treasure map, and the butler did it. All the tropes in one.
Yeah.
So that's another great instance. Of course, in the engineer's thumb, when they were trying to determine where the house was.
Oh, right.
That the engineer, Mr. Hatherley, could go and retrieve his burnt thumb. They didn't know exactly where they were going. Sherlock Holmes, the hydraulic engineer, and Inspector Bradstreet were together with Watson in the train, and Bradstreet had spread an ordnance map of the county out upon the seat and was busy with his compasses, drawing a circle with Iford for its center. So he figured out what the radius was, 10 miles from the village, and it would be within that circumference that they needed to make their search.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that's another example of use of a map that really gives the reader a sense of where things are.
Yes.
And there's a similar one in Priory School, and it's my favorite, I think, about maps, because what happens is they're investigating the mysterious disappearance, of course, of Lord Saltire. And Watson says, Holmes left the house alone, returned after 11. He had obtained a large ordnance map of the neighborhood, and this he brought into my room, where he laid it out on the bed, and having balanced the lamp in the middle of it, I love that, he began to smoke over it and occasionally to point out objects of interest with the amber stem of his pipe. This case grows on me, Watson. Look at this map. This dark square is the Priory School. I'll put a pin in it. Now, it's on the bed, so he's putting a pin in it. Okay. Now, this line is the main
lamp.
road.
There's a lamp on the map on the bed.
Yes,
and then a pin.
The
Look
ashes from his pipe are sparking into the atmosphere. Watson says to himself, I immediately change my room for the rest of the evening. Now, this is the main road. You see it runs east and west past the school. You see also there is no side road for either a mile away. Anyway, the nice part is that map, Holmes's map of the neighborhood of the school. Now, of course, this isn't the ordnance map. This is a drawing, theoretically, that Watson doesn't mention specifically, but it appears in the story. But that's lovely, because believe me, without this, I could never make sense of what was going on in this case.
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful tool to just kind of help orient the reader toward, where we're going physically. There's brush over there. There's a road over this way. For Watson or Conan Doyle to describe it in text, it becomes a little bit convoluted. So seeing it laid out like this is really important. And that reminds me of another story where there is a similar drawing laid in like this, and that is in The Golden Pince-Nez But we're not talking about a map per se. This is really more like the floor plan, because what we need to understand is the layout of the house and where the corridor is and where the professor's bedroom is. And of course, the one thing that both the corridor leading in one direction and a corridor leading in another direction had in common was the coconut matting on the floor. And this is exactly what confused the perpetrator of the crime, because she had lost her pince-nez in the scuffle and was struggling to get back to where she needed to be or to escape the house. And, of course, she found herself trapped in the professor's bedroom.
Well, and we have all those details and the layout because Holmes is talking to Stanley Hopkins, who admires Holmes tremendously and who thought of this case as an opportunity to put Holmes's methods into practice. So Holmes says, well, what sort of a job did you make of, your work? And Hopkins says, I must ask you first, Mr. Holmes, to glance at this rough plan, which will give you a general idea of the position of the professor's study and the various points of the case. It will help you in following my investigation. And he unfolds a chart that Watson reproduces, and that's just lovely. That's Hopkins thinking to himself, I've just earned a few points here from my mentor.
Yeah.
Look what I've done here.
And even more amazingly, the rough plan that Hopkins has sketched out, it mimics Conan Doyle's handwriting extraordinarily well. Good for you, Hopkins.
Yeah. Like a winky dink.
Indeed. Other instances of maps. There was, I think, this was really instructive to the case in the Bruce Partington plans. He had a list of, I think, 3 foreign spies, and then he crossed that with their addresses and laid them out on a map and discovered that it was, in fact, Hugo Oberstein's that intersected with the London Underground, particularly when it came to an above-ground area where there was access to the roof of the train from a window of that very apartment at Caulfield Gardens. Just a wonderful workmanlike piece of logic by Holmes. Say, well, here are our protagonists or antagonists. Here are their addresses. Let's map it out.
Yeah. Absolutely fabulous. And, of course, the Bruce Partington's plans is one of those cases where you really need to understand the position of the underground and the position of the house is going to observe to make any sense to you at all. But isn't it grand? And it's interesting, in calling out maps and floor plans, as Ron Groenewoud suggested, really adds another level of verisimilitude to the world of Sherlock Holmes. No wonder so many people obviously thought of Holmes as a real person. I mean, he makes drawings. You can see where things are. I mean, of course, it's enormously realistic.
Yeah, it brings it to life, certainly. Couple of other instances. Here's a good trivia question. Dr. Schlesinger from Lady Frances Carfax. He was doing some research. Of course, he was a missionary from South America, and Lady Frances, was drawn to him, his remarkable personality, his wholehearted devotion, the fact that he was recovering from a disease that he contracted while he was on one of his missionary duties. But what was Dr. Schlesinger doing while he was staying at the Englischerhof?
Well, he was the evil Holy Peters.
Yes.
And he was staying in Switzerland for the season, but I don't remember what he was doing.
He was also the Holy Evil Peters.
Evil Holy Peters. Very good. The Holy Evil Holy Peters.
He was, he spent his day as the manager described it to me, upon a lounge chair on the veranda with an attendant lady upon either side of him. He was preparing a map of the Holy Land with special reference to the kingdom of the Midianites, upon which he was writing a monograph.
No. Oh, that's grand. That's
Isn't it?
grand reference. I'd paid no attention to that or completely forgotten it.
Yes.
That's great.
So any other maps of interest that you wish to call out before we close the books on this?
Well, I can't, I'm sure there are more. I can't think of any.
I don't think there were any that were absolutely essential to Holmes and Watson solving a case. We are told in The Devil's Foot that Dr. Leon Sterndale he loved seclusion, which caused him to spend the greater part of the intervals between his journeys in a small bungalow buried in the lonely wood of Beauchamp-Ariens. Here, amid his books and his maps, he lived an absolutely lonely life, attending to his own simple wants and paying little apparent heed to the affairs of his neighbors. And as promised, we have a drawing for a back issue of the Baker Street Journal. Every listener who supports us on Substack and on Patreon is eligible to win. You are automatically entered for this drawing every month if you are a supporter of any kind. So let's bring out the prize wheel and give it a big spin. See what number it slows down on. Looks like number 72, and that is Walter Moreland. Congratulations to you, Walter. We will put a copy of a back issue of the Baker Street Journal in the mail to you. If you would like to join the likes of Walter and literally ones of others, you too can be part of this select group simply by going to trifles.substack.com or patreon.com/trifles. The links are in the show notes in whatever podcast app you happen to be listening to us on. Now, back to the show.
Well, there is one map that we really should mention just for the sake of completeness and for the extra dimension.
Yes.
It gives you. And those are the maps produced by Dr. Julian Wolff.
Oh, yeah.
Of a variety of ways of looking at the world of Sherlock Holmes. Julian produced and published a collection of maps. He was an avid map maker and map studier. And those maps actually have been updated some years ago by someone who wrote to me, and I meant to, we could bring him to one of our podcasts to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere to talk a little bit about updating those maps. But Julian's maps are just lovely, and they show you, among other things, the various places in England that Holmes travels to, the various places in the world Holmes travels to, the world according to Sherlock Holmes. He pulls out wonderful little symbols and drawings representing each case, and he was also a great fan of heraldry. But it's a lovely example because many people who have an enthusiasm for Sherlock Holmes also have an enthusiasm for things like maps.
Absolutely. Love that. And those are just iconic drawings within the world of Sherlockiana. Something to check out if you ever have an opportunity to.
Yeah, and we use one, obviously, in I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the world.
Yeah, and it's the wonderful colored edition. I think the Sherlock Holmes Society of London issued that as a Christmas card in the 1950s. Was it Lord Donegal that colorized a number of the maps?
I don't know, but Lord Donegal did that over several years. He used Julian would provide him with a drawing. And so there are several of those Lord Donegal Christmas cards over the years, which the front of was one of Julian's maps.
Yeah. Collector's items indeed. for anyone who's interested in Sherlock Holmes or maps or both. And that is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
This case grows upon me, Watson. There are decidedly points of interest in connection with it. Here, look at this map. There are certain geographical features which may have a good deal to do with our investigation. This dark square is the Priory School. This, the main road, with no side turning for a mile either way. To the north of the school, the land rises slowly. To the south, a large district of arable land with high walls and hedgerows. Impossible territory for a bicycle.